This episode covers sensitive or potentially triggering topics for some listeners. Please listen with care. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Horizon Line, a podcast brought to you by Horizon Behavioral Health, where we dive into real conversations that matter. I'm your host, Ryan Weeks, and today's episode is really exciting. I am really excited to have Tonier Cain here with us today, along with my coworkers, Jan and Rhonda. I think it's going to be a really great conversation. And Tonier, thank you for coming. Welcome to Lynchburg.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know you were here not too long ago, but I just want to give you a moment to introduce yourself to the audience.
I'm Tonier Cain. I'm probably known most for being an advocate, but I'm also an expert. I'm the former team leader for the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. I'm an author, award-winning film producer. I also produce television now, and I have been training and educating in every 50 states here in the United States, as well as other countries. I'm known in 60 countries for my work, but I am here in Lynchburg for an event to give some hope, and because most people know me because of my story. And so I'm excited to be here and wherever I can come and just let people know that no matter what, that there's hope, people can get better.
Well, thank you for being here and for sharing your story. Rhonda, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Rhonda Turner. I work at Horizon. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have worked in every area of the continuum of care, from inpatient, outpatient, crisis stage, currently working with office-based addiction treatment program and the Lynchburg Adult Recovery Court. I am so pleased and honored to have Tonier here. When I was doing women's IOP group, I was introduced to Tonier Cain, and I actually have the video DVD today. It's called Behind Closed Doors. This was my first introduction to her. She is a powerful woman, and we are fortunate to have her here with us. This video gave a lot of women that I was working with hope. And so I'm excited to dive into the conversation talking about trauma and the work that she has been doing.
Great. And last but not least, Jan, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Januwaa Davis, Program Manager of Prevention and Wellness Services here at Horizon Behavioral Health. My work focuses on substance use prevention, suicide prevention, trauma and resiliency, and overall mental wellness. I've been doing this work for about 25 years. And over those years, I've heard many powerful speakers. But back in March, I had the opportunity to hear Tonier Cain. And at that time, there were many community members in the audience, and people were motivated and inspired by her story. But at that time, I knew that there was a bigger calling or another calling, and that she needed to make her way back to Lynchburg, Virginia, and have an opportunity to address our service providers and those that are responsible for developing systems and things like that. And so I am so honored to have her back here today.
Yeah, Tonier, could you tell us a little bit about your story and Healing Den?
So, unfortunately, my story isn't uncommon these days. As these two women just talked about the work that they do, if it was less common, you probably wouldn't have as much work to do. And so first, I want to thank you for the work that you are doing, because I know it's not easy working with my peers, I call them, the populations I've been in, and that sometimes it's overwhelming, and you just see so many different people come back and forth, and the caseloads are heavy, and they don't seem to be able to move forward no matter what you do. But I thank God for people that I call you guys the healers, because no matter what you may be going through in your own life, and there's a saying, in the professional arenas, because I have, companies where I have people that work for me that work with people with populations that I've been through, and I never tell them leave your personal life at home when you walk through these doors, because that's impossible. So I'm very grateful that people that continue to deal with my life, the lives of people like me, and still have to maintain your own life. So you guys are my heroes. And because I couldn't work with a Tonier Cain. There's no way I will work with somebody like, we all have our gifts, and that's not my gift. But so my story is, like I said, not uncommon. I've been through neglect, abandonment as a child, and sexual abuse very early on. And I ended up going into the foster care systems around age 11, and then was able to go to a family member's house and But as children do, they want to be connected to the people they're supposed to be connected to. So I wanted to go back to my mother, was the one that I got a lot of the verbal and physical abuse. And I was put into situations where I was sexually abused and as early as age 9. So by the time I started going into the systems of care, around age 11, I was drinking because my mother was an alcoholic, so there was always alcohol. So I would find these half-filled cups sitting around, and what I realized was I could deal with life better. The men that came wasn't as shameful. Things didn't seem as painful. So by the time I went through my foster care, then with a family member, then back with my mother, and attempted suicide at age 14 because I thought that was the only way out. And then I ended up going, after I'm discharged from the hospital, I was released back to my mother's care, but she sent me to live with one of her sisters, my aunt. But by then I was an alcoholic. I was drinking gin and juice just to be able to stay in school all day. And not long after that, I met a guy that was well into his 20s. I was still a young teenager. He befriended my mother by giving her all the alcohol she could drink so she could sign the marriage license. And I married him as a teenager. And I guess I thought that, well, maybe this older man could protect me from all the other bad men, but he was one of my worst predators because I believed that he would take care of me and protect me. But he abused me over and over again, and then he left me in the streets with nothing and took my son away from me at age 2 as a form of punishment. And I ended up where you always welcome, the streets. And I lived there for 19 years, and everything you do as a alcoholic, a drug addict, somebody that has no hope, I did. So I ended up with 83 arrests and 66 convictions over those 19 years, not allowed to go in anybody's house, and eating out of a trash can. And as a form of rapes or prostitution, I never knew how my children, when I lived in the streets, were conceived, who their fathers were. I was being raped all the time, and I was prostituting almost every day. It was just, but they were mine. And rightfully so, they were taken away from me, rightfully so. And so I lived like that for 19 years, almost 20 years living on the streets, homeless with no hope. And 21 years ago, I ended up back in prison with pregnant with my daughter. And I did something I never sincerely did before. I cried out to God. And I don't call it prayer, but it was a desperate, eerie cry to God sincerely. And it was something like, I don't know if you listen to people like me, but if you do, please help me. Please don't let them take this child, because I knew I would be successful for suicide. Once I gave birth to my daughter, they put me back on my mental health medication. I was going to cuff it. I had a plan. But God, purpose will prevail. And he stepped in, and my life changed over these last 21 years. Truthfully, I don't even know how it happened. And that's how I know it's God, because I know there's nothing in me in the natural what I've done, what has been done over the last 21 years. One of my clients for my training company is South Dakota Supreme Court, like people, the court system, Supreme Court system in the state of South Dakota. You know, they were one of my clients pre-COVID. I would go every year just to keep them update on trauma-informed care. And it's funny because when I was in the program, thankfully, after I cried out to God, I ended up going to a program that someone asked me what happened to me instead of what's wrong with me. And that's when my life changed. And I was able to keep my daughter with me. So yeah, it is. So guys, the work that you're doing it because all things are possible with God.
Thank you for sharing.
I hope that's enough, Ryan. I don't know how deep you want me to go into it.
No, that is fantastic. Thank you for sharing. When we talk about trauma-informed care, Jan, I'll kind of field this question to you. What does it mean to be trauma-informed in everyday life?
When I think about what it means to be trauma-informed, it's a word that we've been using maybe about the last 10 years, maybe a little bit more. But many organizations and individuals that provide services seek to become trauma-informed. And what that really means is being aware of a person's personal and societal consequences and how a trauma survivor may respond to words or actions that they may encounter. It also means doing our part as providers not to create additional or to further the harm that's already been done to them. It means being trauma-informed means helping to create a world that can foster growth and resiliency, the ability for people to bounce back after really harmful things have happened to them, and to provide a space where an individual can heal from the things that have happened.
And how do you think parents or family members who maybe have seen that trauma in someone else, what is the best way for them to help someone that they see has been through trauma?
First of all, we've probably all have experienced some form of trauma, no matter who we are. All of us at some point have experienced trauma. And when we talk about trauma, it's like, well, what exactly are we talking about? And so trauma is a terrible event, and that depends on how a person processes what has happened to them. But it could literally be anything. It may be an accident, it may be witnessing a crime, or it may also be seeing something happen. So trauma doesn't have to be where something happened directly to you. It may be witnessing those things happen. It could be, just basic natural disasters, or witnessing crime, individuals who live in communities that are filled with crime, even though they may not have been shot. The mere fact that they witnessed the shooting or they live in that constant feeling of unsafety could be traumatic in and of itself. It could also be physical or emotional abuse or neglect. Any of those things could be traumatic for an individual. And so as parents and as caregivers, when we talk about helping our young people to heal from those things, and whether it's a caregiver as a parent or a teacher or a mentor or someone that has this person in their care they love and they want to support, it's about fostering a safe, responsive and nurturing environment, and anything that we can do to reduce the risk of these lifelong negative effects on an individual's emotional and physical, psychological well-being. So it's creating a safe and stable environment by providing just consistency. We know that all of us thrive in areas of consistency. And so when I think about consistency and think about being able to predict what's going to happen in the future, I think about 5 years ago when we were in the midst of COVID and it had just started, and we were all really struggling because we didn't know what the next day would bring. And so creating a safe and stable environment where a young person or an individual knows what's going to happen next is very powerful. Listening and validating an individual's feelings. I work with young people, and oftentimes they say what is so frustrating to them when it comes to their parents is that their parents minimize their experiences and don't validate what they're going through. And so just creating being able to listen to an individual and validating the feeling that they have, even if you don't understand it, even if you had went through the same experience, you may not have had the same feelings they do, being able to validate those feelings. Being calm and supportive. We know that when you live in environments where there's not peace is so important. And so being able to provide a calm and supportive environment where you don't have to flinch because you heard something fall, or you heard someone speaking in a loud tone, but knowing that you're safe in those environments. And then also very important, and we can't minimize that, especially as an employee of Horizon Behavioral Health and the great work that we provide here at this organization. If an individual needs support and they're unable to work through those things on their own, making sure that we seek treatment and get support and find professional help, because there's lots of individuals in our community, particularly here at Horizon, but many other organizations as well, that is able to help, that is trained and provide evidence-based treatment models that help an individual to work through the trauma that they've experienced.
Rhonda, do you want to speak a little to the work that you're doing and NOBAT and how that can be a resource for some women?
The work that we're doing as an agency, we have a women's IOP group, and we use the Seeking Safety curriculum to address some of the traumas. We also have individual therapy, and we do CBT, trauma-informed CBT, also EMDR, a few treatment modalities that will delve into helping individuals process their trauma. I think it is important, and I echo everything that Jan just said, providing that supportive, that safe place where individual can heal and holding space for them, whether you're holding space as the caregiver to be able to listen to them, or you're holding space as the therapist that's going to be treating them, but giving them that place where they can heal and share. And as Jan said, oftentimes people don't feel heard and they don't feel seen, and they definitely don't feel validated because they are shameful of what has occurred, what has happened. If it's been sexual or physical abuse, we have to process that with them, and the role, that was not their fault, that someone you trusted, who was in authority took advantage of you. And so we process those types of things and work with the individual to heal in therapy. But holding space for those people and providing that calm and that nurturing space for them to heal is key to their recovery. And I want to say back to being trauma informed. Our agency years ago, we became a trauma informed agency. And that meant from everybody from the janitorial staff to the administrative assistants, everybody that was a person that was employed at Horizon, they were trained on what trauma is and how to respond, and to kind of shift that focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And that was huge for our agency. I'm not sure how many years ago that was, but we recognized back then the need to have our staff, our employees, to be able to provide that empathetic response, and understanding that sometimes our tone, when an individual is checking in, if your tone is not right, maybe you've had a bad day, that could be a trigger for somebody who's going through. So how do I take care of myself? How do I monitor my nonverbals, so that I'm not offending anyone that may have been exposed to trauma? So I think that was key for Horizon back then, for us to take that step to become a trauma-informed agency.
And Tonier, you mentioned how the first person who really asked about you, how that helped you to start your recovery journey. Do you want to speak about that experience?
Well, yeah, but I want to also piggyback on some of what these ladies were saying. I agree totally with everything you're saying. One of the things that when I'm training people on how to be trauma-informed, and when we created the definition of trauma-informed care at NCTC, the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care, it was very vague, very general. However, I always remind people trauma-informed care is truly not about the trauma. And, it's about the response of the trauma. And our jobs as providers is to help our consumers, those that's in our program, to create a consumer-owned toolkit to help them to self-soothe and self-regulate from their trauma individually, because it's the 6 components of trauma-informed practices tells us. Yes, the number one thing is safety. And I think that in Boston, back in 2017, the Boston Hospital Medical Center, they were the first one that started to design comfort rooms. But comfort rooms were just, they went in, they used to be seclusion rooms, and then they go in and they put this blue color they put these clouds and blue sky colors on the walls, and they got these beanbag chairs and all of that. But what was happening is every time that someone responded to their trauma that they seen as a symptom of mental illness, or someone just wants to be non-compliant, they would go, well, don't you think you should go in a comfort room? So what is that? You put them in seclusion. You're telling them to go. I have never been, and a lot of people, my peers, never been big of like comfort rooms, because I think people begin they have good intentions, but they become seclusion rooms. And because trauma-informed care, trauma-informed practices, okay, we understand what trauma-informed care, but now we switch it into how we put this into a practice. And so it's really about individualizing treatments for people and helping them to come up with these toolkits. And I always tell, I always tell people that sometimes you just have to plant good seeds. And you can't expect somebody to become a Tonier because they're in your program right now. If you plant these good seeds, down the line, somebody got to provide sunlight. And eventually what you planted will grow and to help them to be who they are, because it's never about us. It's never about us. It's about those that we're serving. So yeah, it's really about the response and helping them to become self-sufficient, be able to self-regulate. The only difference between me now and me 21 years ago is I have a healthier toolkit. Cocaine served itself well for me. Crack, so it kept me from blowing my brains out. But I was losing my children. I was going to prison. It had all these negative effects. And so I just had to find a healthier tools to replace the tools that I used to help me the best way, which was numbing me. And that's the only difference is. And that's what we do when we use trauma-informed practices. And yeah, that my therapist asked me what happened to me. And one of the things I know now, because I'm on the expert side, is that, we have the right not to disclose. Who are we to think that somebody should automatically trust us? You know what I mean? Come in and we ask, well, what happened to you? most times by the time we get to people, we have told these stories so many times and they had just been gone on deaf ears and there's no bringing it back together. You want to open up the can of worms, Pandora's box, but nobody know how to put it back together because they ask the question but not prepared to hear the answer because they're not trauma-informed or they don't understand trauma-informed practices and the 6 components of that. Fortunately, I went through a program where, just like you just said, everybody and this was a program for pregnant inmates. So we left the prison system and went into this community program. And so a lot of the staff that was the maintenance staff were correctional officers that came in the building. And I remember and it's not really just about my therapist. Yes, she did ask the right question. She was a trauma-informed therapist. She was. And my treatment was trauma. It was trauma treatment. It wasn't a traditional treatment. But like you said, there's so many other things that have to come together. Like at 5 o'clock in the morning, I would have a dream about my kids and I wake up and they weren't there. So to me, that's a nightmare, and so I would be triggered and I would go down and the cook would be coming in making pancake mix. And she would give me the bowl and she would start helping me to process my triggers, And so yes, absolutely. So when I heard that you guys do that at Horizon, that's key. You can't have the person that's answering the phone not trauma-informed or, the person that take the day-to-day information. So it wasn't just about my therapist. And yes, I was fortunate to have an amazing therapist. And I mean, come on now. If I was her, I would be like, because of her, millions of people were given hope and lives changed because of my work in 60 countries. So that one person, that's an amazing thing to think about. And that's the position that everybody at Horizons is in. That's what the work that you do. It's not about, this, because you guys are about family. You're not just about the person you're treating. It's about their family members and generations to come, So, yeah.
Absolutely. And then for listeners who might not know what the 6 principles are, do you want to explain the 6 principles?
You want to explain? So the number 1 is safety. You can't do it without safety. And then there's trustworthiness. And then you want to be the individualized treatment. And then you wanted people to have choice and control. And then you want to have the connection and making sure people have the right resources, which is very important. And then the self-understanding. So you have to have all of these different practices that you got to work with, and help people, Safety is number 1. My favorite is choice and control. And I know in a lot of correctional institutions, you can't always use choice and control. But when I'm training child protective service workers, I'm like, how often do you just call up those that, you have to see? Because you don't have to do a house visit every single time. A home visit. So that's all they have. And we go in there and we penetrate that and we take away their safety nets because that's it. And so how many times you just call them up and be flexible? Because if you break down choice and control, that's when you have to think about being flexible in your services. And so how many times you call and say, hey, I have to see you today. I don't have to come in your home, but why don't I pick you up and we can sit on a park bench and the kids can play while we spend time together. You have to be present, And I tell my staff, I don't even want you wearing an Apple Watch when you're going to visit people or talk to people or help people. Because you can do a whole email on the watch now, And so you should never have a file in your hand. When you're meeting with somebody, most of us only meet them with an hour or less. You should know enough about that person within an hour because all these things are disrespectful. One of the things so I created the RICH approach. It's called RICH approach, and that's my training. It's respect, individuality, connection, and hope. And these are the things that when going in, we should already understand. I can spend 3 days with an organization and know by the end of the 3rd day who they need to get rid of to become trauma-informed because it's a mindset. Some people, no matter how many Tonier Cain you parade in front of them, never believe that people get better. And, so I was fortunate to have a program. But not only, and I'm going to go a little bit more about the program because when I came in, what they did was not take into they did not just assume because I was an adult, I would know how to be successful in being an adult. They took my history in consideration. Before she got to us, she was 19 years homeless on the streets. Before then, she had an abusive adult husband. She was basically a child. She didn't pay bills. She didn't work, and before then, she had an irresponsible parent. They got evicted. Where would I learn? So I had a case manager that helped me be successful. One time when I went to our apartment with my daughter, she said, you have to budget. I said, lady, I get a $300 welfare check. How you budget that? She said, you do. And because this woman taught me how to budget a $300 welfare check and to check and balance with the 18 months of leaving prison, I became a homeowner. And I own 8 companies, 2 of them global, because somebody told me, showed me how to be successful. All this should be a part in these community programs. You know what I mean? If we really want people to be successful, it's like, don't help us just obtain it, but help us to maintain it in the community. And that's what my program did.
I think that's important because it speaks to individualized care, that, what works for one person may not work for the other. And that's when your good assessments come in, that you know exactly what you're looking at, and partnering with the client, partnering with the individual on their own treatment goals. That's what helps, because they may not be ready to address them. So we teach them those skills, those coping skills, to help them through. And when they're ready, they get to decide when they're ready. And that's what we do here at Horizon, is meeting the individual where they are.
Jen spoke on something, and she said that, and you're right, we all have some kind of trauma, but you spoke on something and you just touched on it as you was telling us all about the work that you do. But you're right. One of the things you said was trauma. A lot of people don't even understand that they've had traumatic events.
Exactly.
Right? A lot of people don't know that having a man beat on you is trauma, because they seen their mother being beat on. And then we lay up in the bed with the man and they love it. And so they think, oh, that's how much he loves me. Also, trauma is not only witnessing and having our own personalized interpersonal experience of trauma, but it's also got something to do with disasters. Like, how many people are losing? I mean, like, I live in Beverly Hills. I live in California. We just had fires, and people became homeless and lost everything and was misplaced. And so it's so many. With social media now, we're exposed to everybody's trauma, so we take on those. You can't even get away from it now, And not to mention the healers. I mean, a lot of people that get into this work is because they have their own personal trauma or somebody in their family. So, one of the first trainings anybody should have is Heal the Healers training before they want to work with anybody with trauma. The first trauma-informed care training should be Heal the Healer, so they can help them to understand their own trauma, so it won't get in the way of them helping others.
Yeah, one of the things that we were talking about earlier was the idea that many of us have experienced trauma, and sometimes there's this whole adage of like, just get over it. Everybody's gone through something something bad, but we also know that getting over it doesn't just magically happen, and getting over it, you can't just magically erase your pain. And when that happens, what happens is those things continue to live in our bodies. So our minds may forget, but our bodies always remember. And so sometimes that happens. One example I have is I have a good friend, and back in 2004, she lost her mother. And for many years in January, she would say, I just haven't felt well lately. I don't know what's wrong with me. And then a week or two would go by and she'd be like, oh yeah, now I remember, my mom passed during this time. And so that was a traumatic experience for her. And although she wasn't conscious that was what was causing these feelings for her every January. And it's the whole thought that even when sometimes you think you can just erase it, but our bodies still remember that pain, still remember that trauma. And so it's important that if you have experienced something, that you find a way to work through it. And for some of us, that means, professional treatment, but there's also other ways that individuals can work through some of that trauma on their own. And so just encouraging people, when something traumatic has happened, even if it's just witnessing something, that we find a way to heal and work through that trauma.
Yeah, because it's really about the way we create our toolkit is We tap into our strengths. And what happens over many years before people come to Horizon is that they've been told so much about their weaknesses, but no one pointed out their strengths. And so our strengths become our outline. It becomes our outline for how we fill in our toolkit. What I realized was one of my tools is exercising. It's a strength for me because I love it. And when I first started to work out, I wanted, because I didn't want to wear the waist trainers. They're evil. They're evil. So I would work out just so I wouldn't have to wear it. But it made me feel amazing. And during the time that I was trying to reconnect with my children, and it was a very distressful, triggering time for me. And so but I realized that's a tool. But a lot of people don't want to work out. Is there my faith? I have all these different tools, but a lot of people still trying to figure out how to create this toolkit. They'll ask me, "What are your tools, Tonier?" And my last book, and this is not a plug, but you can buy it anywhere so a book is not. It's Relationships After Trauma, and it's a guidebook that you work through. It's a 10-chapter you work through, and how we get through, how we create these toolkits in and out days of working with people. One of the things that trauma survivors have to be responsible for is this. You're responsible to let somebody know that you are a trauma survivor. Now, once you tell them that, it's up to them what they do with it. And when I started working for the National Center for Trauma Reform, they brought me in as a team leader. I had no higher education. They hired me in 2008. I left prison 4 years before, and so with no higher education, and I'm the team leader, and everybody on the team got letters behind their names, And so one of my jobs is to be a part of this team that go out and educate the whole country on the impact of trauma. And, but one of the things I used to do, I had an office in Alexandria, Virginia. You can see the Washington Monument, the beautiful canal. Yeah, nice, real nice. That was real nice. But one of the things I wanted to be, as a lot of kids do, become a class clown. I wanted to be the office clown because I thought if you could laugh with me, you won't laugh at me or you won't judge me, because they are who they are to me. So I was, judging them. But one of the things I realized that my toolkit, my laptop had to also have my mental tools in it to help me. So I would get in my office. I would close the blinds, even though I had a beautiful view. But I didn't want people looking at me. And so it's just a lot of these tools that I had to utilize because of triggers. But also, we learn about different triggers the rest of our lives. You know why everything that I have is called healing? Because I'm never healed. I'm always being reminded of a trigger. And like you said, when triggers come, a tool must match it for us not to, end up back where we came from. I can go on and on about this, but it's really about being good GPS systems for people, and I always say this because nobody go anywhere is unfamiliar without the GPS system, right? So you plug in your address, and what do you expect your GPS system to do when you plug in an address?
It's going to get you there.
You expect it to get you to your destination, right? But if you like me and like a lot of other people, when they say exit right in 1,000 yards or 1,000 feet, I don't know what 1,000 feet or I take the first exit. So what does it do when you make the wrong turn? The GPS system. Isn't it interesting how your computer is designed, set up for you to make a mistake? Because if it didn't, it wouldn't reroute you. Once you got off course, it would leave you stuck. And that's what we do sometimes when people decide, when they relapse, when they get back out there, we leave them stuck because we're so focused on what happened instead of getting them to their destination the fastest way, the safest way we can get them. You see? And if we can keep that in mind, we can do so much more. That's my, don't get me started because I got to,
No, we love it. We love that. And working with substance use, we see that.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned it today. Using substances is a coping skill. It's not a good coping skill, but it is.
Yep.
And so a lot of those individuals haven't learned how to use good coping skills. And that's where we come in to teach them that. But you're so right. When people get off course, instead of, what did you do? Why did you drink that?
Right.
Instead of having that empathetic response that says,
Yep.
how do we get back on track? How do we reroute it?
Yeah.
That GPS.
Reroute
How do
it.
we get back on track? We're here now,
Yeah.
not trying to,
Yeah.
backtrack, but how do we reroute you to get you back on track?
It'll take a little longer maybe, but we're going to get you back there.
We're going to do, notice, we are going to
we're
do
gonna
it.
do this. And that's the thing. And people do great work, and some people don't. That's the truth. But those that do, I think that we want it so bad for people where we make it about us sometimes. You know what I mean? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I've had to learn that too.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing. I've been in the field for over 30 years, 31 years actually. And I've had to learn coming in new, you want to help and save everybody.
Yeah.
You feel like this is what I have to do. And we don't have that patience to see, hey, I'm going to sow some seeds. I may not see them come to fruition, but I'm just going to sow the seed and just be patient. But you stated it earlier, most of us who are in the field come from the field because there's a reason, right? And we want to see people fixed and right away, but it doesn't work like that. And we just have to be encouraged to know that each one of us serve a role and we sow these seeds.
Yes.
And guess what? I sow the seed today, somebody else comes along and waters it. But
Sunlight.
we give that hope that one day you keep doing this thing, that you're going to make it. And we have to give that hope. That's the hope that we have to push in this when we're dealing with individuals that we're dealing with that come into our care, meeting them where they at and not rushing their process because we think it's all about us, because it's not. It is about them, and we go at their pace.
Always about them.
Yeah, one of the things I would say, and I heard someone say this in a training I was in, is that we must shift our thinking. And a trauma survivor said, I thought I was broke and needed fixing, but actually I was hurt and needed healing. And so if we shift our focus and how we think about the people that we work with, we have the power to really change lives and have an impact on the individuals that we serve.
Oh my goodness, you are so right. I train a lot of federal parole and probation officers in our country. And the first thing I ask them is, what is your job description? And they always tell me three things, no matter where I'm at in the country. They may not say in the same order, but they said, my job is to enforce the court's ruling and monitor and keep the community safe, meaning I got to make sure they're doing whatever that the court said that they need to do to honor probation. I need to, make sure I monitor them, know where they at all times. And if they are a threat to the community, pull them off the streets. And I said, okay, what if I have asked you that and you said, my job is to help them to be successful in the community? We work the way we think. If I'm thinking enforce, monitoring, you know what I mean? I'm not going to take in consideration that before they went to prison, they were homeless and now they're out on parole and they still homeless. I'm not going to violate them for not obtaining stable housing. I'm going to take into consideration they may need help and direction to stable housing. You know what I mean? But yeah, I'm sorry, because I know we're getting...
No, I'm just soaking all this information in your story. Thank you for sharing. I hate to cut it short because this is so great. So I'll just leave it all for a final question for all three of you. If you could leave our listeners with one call to action, whether they're people you're training or they're survivors or providers out in the community, what would that one thing be?
Mine's is my motto: where there's breath, there's hope. There's no matter what the record says, what they look like, what they smell like, no matter what. No one has the right to deem somebody hopeless. That is not anyone's right. And if they're in front of you and they got breath in their bodies, then you have an opportunity to help them to get better.
As soon as you asked the question, Ryan, hope was the first thing that came to mind. Hope just being the belief that you can get better. And even when life is hard, there's a possibility, there's an opportunity for improvement, healing, a brighter future ahead. We know that there's so much power and the ability to see things different than what they are now. And so I would say adage, but keep hope alive.
Yeah, I think the theme of hope is definitely where I would go. But I also want people to practice self-care. I know it's a trendy word now in our community, and it's more than just getting my nails done and my feet done, but it's about taking care of your emotional, your mental health. Get the professional help that you need. I always believe that the ultimate self-care is therapy, which is a gift that you give yourself. And sometimes you don't even know you needed that gift. But I would say it's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to get the help that you need.
Well, Tonier, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Jan. Thanks for joining us on the Horizon Line. If today's conversation resonated with you, we hope you'll take a moment to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and that way you'll never miss a new episode. You can also stay connected with us on social media. Just search for Horizon Behavioral Health on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Oh, X. Thanks for joining us on the Horizon Line. If today's conversation resonated with you, we hope you'll take a moment to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and that way you'll never miss a new episode. You can also stay connected with us on social media. Just search for Horizon Behavioral Health on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. For more resources, upcoming events, or to just learn more about our services, visit us at horizonbh.org. And remember, keep your eyes and ears on the Horizon Line. We'll see you next time.